The first time I found tracks that ended without explanation was during a routine control route inspection on the north face of Garnet Pass, elevation 9,200 feet, air temperature minus 14 Celsius, wind negligible. It was 20 past 2 in the morning. I was alone on the slope. The track's boot prints, recent, unweathered, consistent pressure and stride crossed my path at a shallow traverse angle heading east toward the Fiddler's Couloir starting zone. They were clean, sharp edges, no windfill, no sublimation softening. Whoever had made them had been there within the last hour, maybe less, and they simply stopped, mid-stride, left foot planted, weight clearly forward, the compression halo around the print fully intact. No right foot followed. No sign of a fall, a sit, a pivot. No disturbance of any kind. The snow beyond that last print was unbroken for 300 meters in every direction I checked with my headlamp. I need to explain what I do and why I was up there at that hour before this goes any further. My name is Colton Weiss, for 6 winters, 2019. Through the current season, I've worked as an avalanche hazard technician for the Mountain Corridor Safety Division of the State Highway Authority in a western mountain state. I won't name precisely. The pass I'm assigned to carries a 2-lane highway across a major continental divide, and during winter, that highway runs beneath or adjacent to 43 cataloged avalanche paths, 7 of which are classified as extreme hazard. Our job is to keep that road open, or, when we can't, to close it before something comes down on a driver who doesn't know what's above them. There are 5 of us on the team during peak season December through April. 2 forecasters who manage the weather stations and snowpack data, and 3 field technicians who do the physical work. Stability testing, control route inspections, explosive deployment, documentation. I'm the senior field tech. My control routes are the ones nobody else wants. The north-facing paths above the tunnel gallery. The ones where the wind loading builds fastest and where, historically, our biggest slides have initiated. Night inspections are standard for us, not preferred, not unusual. We inspect at night for 2 reasons. First, highway traffic volume drops after midnight, which means if we trigger something during a control mission, the probability of catching a vehicle is lower. Second, and more critically, the snowpack tells you different things in darkness. You hear consolidation settling. You feel temperature inversions through your skin. Your headlamp reveals surface hoar, crystal growth that you'd miss in daylight because the sun washes out the refraction. You learn to trust what the snow sounds like under your boots in the dark wind slab, the hollow drum of a poorly bonded layer. These are things I've built a career around hearing. So that night, January 14th, I was doing a standard inspection traverse of the Fiddler's starting zone and the adjacent Raven Chute path. Moderate hazard forecast. Recent storm had deposited 40 centimeters over 3 days, with a marked temperature inversion the night before that suggested possible surface hoar formation on leeward aspects. I needed to check whether the new snow had bonded to whatever was developing underneath. Standard pit work, standard column tests, standard field notes. The tracks were not standard. I photographed them. I took 6 images with my phone, though the lighting was poor and the contrast between white boot print and white snowfield made the shots less useful than I wanted. I measured the stride length approximately 70 centimeters and the boot print dimensions, which suggested a size 10 or 11 mountaineering boot with a lugged sole. The tread pattern was unusual, widely spaced chevrons, almost like a tire tread, with no visible brand marking I recognized. Then I did what any rational person in my position would do. I assumed someone had been up there, a lost backcountry skier, a confused hiker, and had been picked up by helicopter. It happens. Search and rescue operates in our area regularly. A helicopter landing would explain the abrupt termination of tracks, though it wouldn't explain the absence of rotor wash disturbance in the surrounding snow. I checked for that. The snow surface around the final print was pristine. No compression waves, no displacement, no scatter pattern. I finished my inspection, completed my pit test. The bond was actually better than expected. Q2 shear quality on the extended column tests, filed my notes, and descended to the highway shed by 4 in the morning. I logged the tracks in my field report under the Other Observations section. Our reports have a standard format: date, time, location, aspect, elevation, temperature, wind, precipitation, snowpack observations, stability test results, control recommendations. At the bottom, there's an open field for anything anomalous. Usually people note wildlife tracks, equipment debris from previous control missions, or unusual wind formations. I wrote, single set of boot tracks traversing at 9,180 feet, heading east, terminating abruptly without continuation or return. No landing zone disturbance, recent formation, origin and terminus unknown. Recommend follow-up if SAR has no current operations in sector. My supervisor, Dara Okafor, read the report the next morning. She checked with county search and rescue. No operations in our zone. No missing persons reports. No permit applications for backcountry access. In the closure area, our pass goes under mandatory closure gates at mile marker 47 and mile marker 63 during active avalanche conditions, and it had been closed since the 11th. She told me it was probably an animal track I'd misidentified in poor visibility. Elk will post hole in soft snow and create impressions that, at headlamp distance, can resemble boot prints. I told her about the chevron tread pattern. She shrugged. Maybe someone ducked the gate before closure and skinned up. Wouldn't be the first time. It wouldn't. People do ignore our closures, but those people leave tracks going both directions. They come up and they go back down. They don't evaporate from a slope at 2 in the morning. I let it go. 11 days later, January 25th, I found the second set. This time I was on the Ravenshoot Path itself, higher up, at roughly 9,600 feet, inspecting a cornice development that had been flagged by our automated weather camera. It was 1:40 a.m., clear sky, minus 19, wind from the southwest at 12 kilometers per hour. I'd been ascending for about 45 minutes along my standard route when my headlamp caught them off to my left, maybe 15 meters away. Same boot print, same chevron pattern, same stride length. The tracks came from below, from the direction of the highway, which shouldn't have been possible because the closure gates were down and I would have seen any other trail breaking through the fresh snow on my own ascent route. But these tracks diverged from mine early, traversing at a slightly different angle, as if whoever made them had been paralleling my path but offset. I followed them uphill. They maintained consistent spacing in depth for approximately 220 meters. Then they stopped, same as before. Left foot, weight forward, stride and complete, nothing beyond. This time, I did something I hadn't done before. I backtracked them downhill instead. I followed the prints back toward their origin, wanting to know where this person had started. The tracks descended the slope in a steady, unhurried traverse for nearly 400 meters before they reached the edge of a rocky buttress where the snow thinned to ice over granite. I lost them there. The ground was too hard to hold an impression, but here's what bothered me. The tracks came from above that buttress, not from below. Whoever made them had descended from higher up the mountain, traversed the slope, and then going back uphill, simply ceased to exist at a particular point. They hadn't turned around. They hadn't ascended beyond my track end. They'd walked uphill into nothing. I documented everything. 37 photographs this time, with a scale card placed beside select prints for dimensional reference. I measured the depth of compression, average 7 centimeters, in the 38-centimeter snowpack, consistent with a person weighing between 75 and 90 kilograms. I noted the track preservation state: fresh, unweathered, edges crisp, crystal structure within the print undisturbed by wind or solar radiation. These were recent, within hours of my arrival, possibly less. When I filed this report, I added a recommendation for a daylight investigation by the full team. Dara agreed. The next afternoon, the 26th, she came up with me and Marcus Pruitt, our second field tech. We relocated the track terminus easily. It hadn't snowed since the previous night, and the prints were still sharply defined despite some minor wind rounding. Marcus knelt beside the final print for a long time. He's been doing this work for 14 years. He has more field hours than anyone else on the team. When he stood up, his expression was odd. Not alarmed exactly, confused in a way that made him uncomfortable. "The compression pattern's wrong," he said. He pointed at the depth of the heel versus the toe, the distribution of weight within the print. "Look at the loading. This is someone walking uphill. Weight's on the ball of the foot. Heel is lighter. That's correct for an ascent. But the last print, the one where it stops, the weight distribution is perfectly even, flat, like they were standing still." "So they stopped walking and stood for a moment," I said. "No." He shook his head. "If you stop mid-stride on a slope, you shift your weight back. You settle onto your downhill foot. Your center of gravity adjusts. This print shows zero adjustment. It's like the foot just..." He didn't finish the sentence. He took his own photos, and we descended. Dara filed a report with the district office. The district office contacted the county sheriff. A deputy came out, looked at our photographs, and told us that without a missing person report or evidence of a crime, there was nothing to investigate. He suggested GPS-collared wildlife research animals. We told him these were clearly human boot prints. He said he'd keep a file open. Between January 25th and March 3rd, I found tracks that terminated without explanation on 4 more occasions, always on my night control routes, always in the starting zones or upper track regions of the north-facing paths, always the same boot print chevron pattern, 70-centimeter stride, consistent depth compression suggesting the same individual, same weight, same pace. Each time the tracks ended the same way: 1 foot planted, stride incomplete, snow beyond pristine. Each time I documented. Each time my reports went through the system and landed in a growing file that nobody was actively investigating. What changed? What moved this from professional curiosity to something else was the night of March 8th. I was at 9,400 feet on the Fiddler's Path, conducting a stability assessment following 36 hours of sustained wind loading from the west. This was a high hazard night. Our forecasters had bumped the advisory to considerable, with pockets of high on the wind-loaded aspects. I was up there specifically to determine whether we needed to initiate a control mission at dawn, deploy GASX charges, or request helicopter-delivered explosives to knock down the wind slabs before they released naturally onto the highway. At approximately 2:15 a.m., while crossing below a convexity in the slope, the most dangerous terrain feature in avalanche work, where the snowpack is under maximum tension, I heard something I have never heard in 6 years of night field work. Footsteps. Not below me, coming up. Not from the highway or my ascent rope. Above me. Someone walking along the ridgeline, maybe 60 vertical meters overhead. The sound was distinct. The rhythmic compression of boots in consolidated snow. That particular crunch that is unmistakable once you know it. Steady pace. Unhurried. I turned off my headlamp. This is instinct for anyone who works alone at night. In the mountains you go dark. You listen. You assess. My night vision was gone, destroyed by the headlamp. But the stars were bright enough that after 30 seconds the snowfield resolved into a blue-gray plain around me, and the ridgeline above showed as a sharp edge against the sky. I saw nothing, no silhouette, no headlamp, no movement. But the footsteps continued. I could track their progression left to right along the ridge, heading east, the same direction all the tracks had been heading every time I'd found them. The sound was crisp in the cold air, maybe 40 or 50 steps, steady, and then silence. Silence that lasted maybe 10 seconds. And then a sound I cannot adequately describe, but will try. A settling, but not the settling of snowpack, not the familiar whumph of a weak layer collapsing under slab weight. This was deeper, lower frequency, like something very heavy shifting position far below the snow surface. A vibration more than a sound. I felt it in my sternum before my ears registered it. I stood completely still. In that moment, I was acutely aware of what was beneath my feet, a wind-loaded slab, possibly 40 to 60 centimeters thick, sitting on a faceted layer that I had not yet tested. I was standing on something that might fail, and something had just produced a vibration that could, theoretically, be enough to break the bond between those layers. Nothing happened. No fracture. No collapse. I waited 3 full minutes by my watch. I timed it, because timing your exposure in avalanche terrain is something you do automatically, and then turned my headlamp back on and completed my assessment with the disciplined focus of someone who understands that being afraid on a slope is how you make fatal mistakes. You acknowledge the fear. You set it to one side. You do the work. The slab was less stable than I'd hoped. Extended column tests propagated on the 14th tap, which is borderline. I recommended a dawn control mission and descended, but here's what I found on my descent. My own ascent tracks my boot prints going up the slope from 2 hours earlier, had been joined by a second set. The chevron pattern prints, they paralleled mine, offset by roughly 3 meters, ascending the same line I had taken. They hadn't been there when I went up. I am certain of this because my ascent route is precise. I choose my line carefully to minimize terrain exposure, and I visually clear the slope section by section as I climb. There were no other tracks when I ascended. Now there were, and they extended past the point where I had stopped, continuing uphill beyond my turnaround point, climbing toward the ridgeline where I had heard the footsteps. I did not follow them. I went down to the highway shed, wrote my report, and sat in the equipment room for a long time before driving home. I need to address the obvious question. Was someone following me? Was this a person, a real, physical, human being stalking me on the mountain at night? I considered this seriously. I discussed it with Dara and with Marcus. We considered the possibilities. A backcountry user who consistently ignored closures. Someone with a specific interest in our work patterns. A mental health crisis leading someone to wander the mountains at night. Each of these was plausible in isolation. None of them explained the terminating tracks. Marcus, who is the most pragmatic person I know, suggested an experiment. On the night of March 14th, he and I went up together. Same route, Fiddler's starting zone, north aspect, control inspection under moderate hazard conditions. We ascended side by side, 15 meters apart. Marcus carried a thermal imaging monocular borrowed from the county search and rescue team, a unit designed to detect body heat at ranges up to 400 meters. We reached the upper starting zone at 2:30 a.m. We separated. I went to my standard observation point, while Marcus positioned himself 200 meters east, with a clear sight line across the entire bowl. We agreed on radio silence except for emergency, and we waited. At 2:47 a.m., Marcus broke radio silence. Colton, I have tracks below your position, bearing roughly 270 from me. They weren't there 9 minutes ago. I looked downhill. He was right. 50 meters below me, crossing the slope on the standard east-heading traverse, a line of boot prints was visible in my headlamp beam. Fresh, clear, the chevron pattern. Do you have thermal? I asked. Negative. Nothing on thermal. I've been scanning continuously. There is no heat signature anywhere on this slope, except you. I descended to the tracks. Marcus watched through the thermal monocular the entire time. The prints were real. I could put my hand in them. They were warm, not warm exactly, but the snow within them was slightly more consolidated than should have been possible from weight alone, as if the compression had generated friction heat. I followed them east. Marcus tracked me on thermal, calling out distance and bearing. 300 meters, 350, 400. They're going to stop, I said. How do you know? They always stop. At 418 meters by Marcus's rangefinder, the tracks ended. Same as every other time. Left foot planted. Weight even. Nothing beyond. Marcus came down from his position. We stood together at the terminus. He swept the thermal monocular in a full 360. Nothing. No heat source. No signature. The mountain was empty, except for us. What the hell is making these? Marcus asked. His voice was level. He's not someone who spooks easily, but I could hear the effort in that levelness. I didn't have an answer. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus and I documented 11 more track sets. We experimented systematically. We set up a trail camera at the point where I'd found the most frequent appearances, a shallow bench on the Fiddler's Path, where the slope angle drops below 30 degrees briefly, before steepening again. The camera was motion activated with infrared flash. It ran for 7 nights. On 3 of those nights, fresh tracks appeared within the camera's field of view. The camera captured nothing, no trigger, no motion, no infrared activation. But in the morning, when we checked the slope, the prints were there, running through the exact field of the camera's sensor, perfectly within its detection parameters, impossible to miss if anything physical had moved through that space. I pulled the camera's memory card and reviewed every frame with Dara. Timestamp gaps showed the camera was functioning throughout. Battery level consistent. No technical failure. Whatever made those prints did not register as motion to an infrared sensor. It did not produce a heat differential against the ambient snow temperature. It left physical compression in the snowpack without being physically detectable. Dara, to her credit, did not try to rationalize this. She's a scientist. Her doctorate is in snow mechanics from a Canadian university, and she recognized that the data was contradictory in a way that didn't resolve into equipment malfunction. She elevated the situation to our district manager, who contacted the state office, who, after a 2-week delay, sent 2 people from a division I hadn't known existed within the Highway Authority. They called themselves the Infrastructure Anomaly Review Unit. I've never been able to confirm that this name appears on any organizational chart. They were both women. One was about 50, gray-haired, introduced herself only as Lena. The other was younger, maybe 35, named Priya, and she carried equipment I didn't recognize, a device that looked like a modified snow probe, but with electronic components embedded along its length, and a tablet connected to it by cable. They didn't ask many questions at first. They reviewed our documentation, all the field reports, the photographs, the trail camera data, Marcus's thermal imaging notes. Then Lena asked one question that reframed everything for me. How old is the highway through this pass? I told her. The original road was built in 1937, though the current alignment dates from a realignment project completed in 1961. The tunnel gallery, the concrete shed that protects a 400-meter section of highway from the most active paths, was constructed between 1958 and 1961. And the avalanche paths, Lena continued. How many have documented historical slides predating the highway? All of them. Avalanche paths are geological features. They've been running for thousands of years. The paths on this mountain have been active since the last glaciation. Have you ever done pit work directly in the gallery zone, under the concrete? I hadn't. There's no operational reason to. The gallery protects the road. The avalanches run over the gallery roof and continue into the runout zone on the valley floor. Nobody digs pits under a snow shed. There's no snowpack to test. It's concrete. Lena nodded. We like to see the gallery, inside, the oldest section. The next morning, Dara, Marcus, Lena, Priya, and I drove to the tunnel gallery. The highway was open that day, moderate conditions, no closures. So we parked in the maintenance pullout inside the gallery and walked the length of it on the service catwalk. The gallery is essentially a reinforced concrete tube, open on the downhill side, with pillars supporting the roof. It's functional, brutal, mid-century engineering. The roof is angled to deflect avalanche debris over the road and into the valley. Inside, it's always dim, always cold, and the sound changes. You go from open mountain acoustics to a compressed, echoing space where every boot step multiplies. Priya walked the length with her probe device, pushing it into the gravel substrate below the catwalk every 10 meters and watching her tablet. Lena walked slowly along the uphill wall, the one set into the mountain face, running her hand along the concrete. "Here," Lena said, about 2/3 of the way through the gallery. She was pointing at the wall surface. "Bring your headlamp close." I did. The concrete was old, water-stained with typical freeze-thaw spalling and mineral deposits from decades of moisture intrusion. But where Lena was pointing, there were marks, not cracks, marks, shallow grooves in the concrete surface, no more than 2 or 3 millimeters deep, arranged in a pattern. It took me a moment to see it. Then I couldn't unsee it. Chevron shapes, widely spaced, approximately the same proportions as the tread pattern. I'd been photographing in snow for 2 months. They were pressed into the wall, not carved pressed, as if something had pushed the concrete inward, leaving an impression the way a boot leaves an impression in snow. But this was a vertical, concrete surface. "There are more," Priya said quietly, looking at her tablet. "The probe is picking up the same pattern in the substrate below us, 6 inches down, repeating." "What makes these?" Marcus asked. Lena turned away from the wall. Her face was composed, but her eyes held something. I recognized the same look Marcus had gotten at the track terminus. The expression of someone whose working model of reality has just been proven insufficient. "You have to understand," she said, "that we don't fully know. We have files, old files from the construction era that document something similar during the original gallery excavation. The construction crews in 1959 reported finding what they called step impressions in the bedrock face when they cut into the mountain. The foreman's report describes them as looking like someone had walked up the rock face like it was a flat surface. The project engineer dismissed it as natural fracture patterns, but he also noted that 3 laborers refused to continue working on that section. 2 of them quit. The third, a man named Harold Engel, stayed, but his later reports to the foreman became increasingly unusual. "Unusual how?" I asked. Lena produced a phone from her coat pocket and showed me a photograph of a handwritten document, old, yellowed, penciled in a careful hand. It was a page from what appeared to be a daily work log. The entry was dated November 2nd, 1959. It read, "Continued forming South Wall Section 7. Crew reports, hearing walking inside the pour before concrete cured. Impossible. Investigated with hammer tests, no voids detected. Likely water pipe vibration from the creek diversion. H. Engel insists sound came from inside the concrete itself. Moving along the wall, east to west. Told Engel to report to medical if he's hearing things. He says it's not hearing things if the marks keep appearing." Harold Engel filed 6 more reports over the following 2 months, Lena said. Each one describes the same phenomenon. Footstep sounds within recently poured concrete, and the appearance of impressions in the set material. The impressions always oriented in the same direction. "East?" I said. "East," Lena confirmed. I sat with this. The gallery catwalk was cold, and the sound of distant traffic echoed through the concrete tube. I could smell mineral water and diesel exhaust and the particular chalky scent of old concrete dust. "What is it?" I asked. "What's walking?" Lena shook her head. "We don't have that answer. What we have is a pattern that appears during high snow winters at approximately 24 sites across mountain highway systems in the western states, always in avalanche terrain, always in areas where significant human construction has intersected active geological slide paths, always the same behavioral signature tracks that begin without origin and terminate without destination, always heading in a consistent directional orientation at each site. How long has this been happening? The earliest documentation we can confirm is from 1943, a military road construction project in a different mountain pass, but there are unconfirmed reports from mining operations in the 1880s that describe something consistent. And you're what? Monitoring it? We document it. We assess whether the phenomenon interferes with infrastructure integrity. We determine whether it poses a direct hazard to personnel. Does it? Lena was quiet for a moment. Then, at two sites where the track activity increased beyond a certain density threshold, there were avalanche events that could not be reconciled with the forecasted hazard conditions. Slides that released on slopes that should have been stable, crown fractures on aspects that didn't have the loading to produce them. In both cases, the highways were under closure when the events occurred. In both cases, maintenance personnel were on the slopes. Were they hurt? One site, no casualties. The other site, this was in 1987, two technicians were caught. One was recovered alive from the debris. He had been carried approximately 400 meters. And the other? His beacon signal was located in the debris field. When the probe team reached the signal location and dug, they found the transceiver, his pack, his boots still laced. Lena let that settle. They did not find him. The search continued for 3 days. Spring melt was monitored for an additional 6 weeks. His remains were never recovered from that debris field. But his boots were there, laced. Correct. I looked at Marcus. His face was very still. The tracks on our slopes, I said. They've been increasing in frequency. In January, I found them once. In February, 4 times. In March, 11 times so far. And we're only halfway through the month. Yes, Lena said. That's why we're here. Priya had finished her probe survey. She came over and showed the tablet to Lena. I caught a glimpse of the screen. It showed a cross-section graphic with color-coded layers, and within those layers, repeated angular patterns that pulsed with a yellow highlight. I couldn't interpret it fully, but the density of those highlights was striking. There were dozens of them, layered through the substrate beneath the gallery, arranged in parallel rows, as if something had walked back and forth beneath the concrete floor hundreds of times. What do we do? Dara asked. She had been silent through most of the gallery visit, but her voice was controlled, professional, director mode. Continue operations as normal, Lena said. Continue documenting. We'll install additional monitoring at this site, passive seismic sensors, and subsurface strain gauges. If the track density crosses 35 events per month, we'll reassess. Reassess what? Whether to close the pass permanently. The permanence of that word hit differently than I expected. Our pass carries significant seasonal traffic. Closing it would reroute thousands of vehicles. It would devastate the communities on either side. Lena was talking about something that would require political will at the state level, and she was saying it calmly, as if it were simply a procedural threshold. Has a pass ever been permanently closed because of this? I asked. Not officially. That not officially carried weight. I didn't press it. Lena and Priya left the next morning. They installed 3 sensor packages in the gallery substrate and paired them with a satellite uplink that fed data to wherever their unit operated from. We were given a direct phone number and instructed to call if the track frequency exceeded 20 in any 7-day period, or if we experienced anything they described as acoustic propagation within constructed surfaces, which I understood to mean footstep sounds inside concrete. I did not call the number, not because the threshold wasn't reached, but because what happened next moved beyond the scope of a phone call. March 22nd, a Saturday. Heavy storm cycle, 3rd day. We've been running control missions every morning and conducting night inspections every 12 hours. The pass was under full closure. Wind loading was extreme 40 centimeters of wind slab development on north and northeast aspects in a single 24-hour period. The Fiddler's Couloir path was primed. We'd hit it with Gazek's charges that morning and triggered a clean size 2 slide that cleared the starting zone. But by nightfall, the wind had rebuilt the slab. I went up at 1 a.m. for assessment. Standard route. The storm had broken and the sky was clearing. Temperature dropping. Fast classic setup for rapid radiative cooling and increased instability as the new snow begins to facet. I was at 8,900 feet, still below the starting zone, when I realized the slope around me was covered in tracks. Not one set, not 2, dozens. In every direction, my headlamp reached uphill, downhill. Traversing left and right, the fresh snow was cross-hatched with chevron-patterned boot prints, hundreds of them, all heading east, all at the same stride length, all at the same depth, as if a crowd of identical people had walked across the slope simultaneously, all moving in the same direction, all at the same pace, and all of them terminated. Every single line of tracks ended abruptly at staggered points across the slope, as if the walkers had been plucked from the surface one by one, each at a different location, but all ceasing the same way mid-stride, weight even, snow beyond undisturbed. I stood in the middle of this field of ended journeys, and I felt something I had never felt before in avalanche terrain. Not fear of the slope. I know how to manage that, how to read the danger and move through it safely. This was different. This was the realization that the slope was being used, that whatever was happening here had nothing to do with me, nothing to do with the highway, nothing to do with avalanches or snow mechanics or anything I'd been trained to understand. I was witnessing the edge of something that operated on a scale and according to rules that were completely alien to my professional framework. The snowpack beneath my feet made a sound, not a whumph. I know that sound. I've heard it 100 times. It means the weak layer has collapsed and you have seconds to react. This was the other sound, the deeper one, the settling that isn't settling, the vibration in the sternum. I moved. Training took over. I descended rapidly, choosing my line to minimize time on the slope, keeping my weight smooth, not punching through the surface, trying to be as gentle as possible on whatever was beneath me. I reached the road in 11 minutes. My hands were shaking, but that was the cold. I called Dara. Then I called the number Lena had given us. Lena answered on the second ring, despite it being nearly 2 in the morning, wherever she was. "How many?" she asked, without me explaining why I was calling. Hundreds, maybe more than I could see. Silence on the line. Then, are you off the slope? I'm on the highway. Stay off the slope. Tell your team no one goes above the gallery until we arrive. Lena, the wind slab is rebuilding. If we don't run a control mission in the morning, that path will release naturally. It'll come down on the gallery roof with a 3-meter crown. The gallery will hold. The gallery is rated for a size 3. If that entire starting zone releases, it could be a 4. Pause. I understand, but I'm telling you, do not put people on that slope right now. Why? What's going to happen? We don't know. That's the honest answer. But at the 2 sites where we observed density at the level you're describing, the events that followed occurred within 72 hours, and in both cases, there were slides that shouldn't have happened, slides that... She stopped herself. Just keep everyone off the slope. We'll be there tomorrow evening. I didn't sleep. I sat in the equipment shed with Marcus, both of us drinking bad coffee and watching the weather data refresh on the forecasting terminal. The wind continued through the night. The loading continued. The fiddler's path was growing heavier by the hour, the slab building like a debt accruing interest, and we couldn't go up to relieve it. Dara came in at 6. We briefed her. She made the decision, no personnel above the gallery until Lena arrived. We would close the pass an additional 2 miles in each direction as a precaution. If the path released naturally, it would hit the gallery roof and either be deflected or it wouldn't. That was the calculation. The day passed slowly. Clear skies, cold, the kind of crystalline winter day that makes mountains look like they're made of glass. From the highway pullout, you could see the fiddler's starting zone, a broad white apron of wind-loaded snow, smooth and convex, the surface gleaming in the sun. It looked beautiful. It looked like a bomb. At 3:47 p.m., the slope fractured. I was standing outside the gallery entrance, binoculars to my eyes, watching for any signs of natural cracking. I saw the crown fracture form a dark line appearing across the width of the starting zone, propagating left to right faster than I could track. The slab released as a single unit, size 4. The entire starting zone, plus sympathetic release of the adjacent Ravenshoot path. 2 paths running simultaneously in a combined event that our hazard model had rated as improbable under those exact conditions. The mass came down in less than 20 seconds. The sound was the sound of the world ending in a small, specific location, a roar that obliterates thought, that fills every space in your skull with white noise and pressure. The gallery took the impact. Concrete dust rained from the ceiling. The structure shook in a way I had never felt in 6 years, but it held. It held because it was built in 1961 by engineers who overspecified everything, who built for the worst case. The debris cloud cleared over the next few minutes. The runout zone below the gallery was filled with avalanche debris, blocks of compressed snow the size of cars, splintered tree trunks, soil, and rocks torn from the path. Standard aftermath for a major event. Except for one thing, the debris field should have been a chaotic jumble. Avalanche debris always is. It's the nature of a turbulent granular flow. Blocks tumble, rotate, fragment randomly. There's no order in it. This debris field had order. I could see it from the gallery entrance with my binoculars, and Marcus confirmed it from the pullout with the spotting scope. The debris blocks, the car-sized chunks of consolidated snow were arranged in parallel rows across the run-out zone, evenly spaced, oriented east to west, like enormous footprints pressed into the valley floor. The pattern was unmistakable. The chevron shape was there, but scaled up grotesquely. Each print was 15 meters long, 7 meters wide, and the spacing between them was consistent at roughly 4 meters. A stride. A stride for something that would have to be, I won't finish that calculation. I did it once, in my head, standing in the gallery entrance with debris dust settling on my jacket, and I won't commit the number to any record. Lena arrived at 8 that evening with Priya and 2 additional people, both men, both carrying equipment I didn't recognize. They drove directly to the debris field. I rode with them. In the dark, by the headlights of their truck, the debris rows cast long shadows across the valley floor. The pattern was even clearer at ground level. Lena stood in the middle of the debris field for a long time. The snow blocks around her rose to head height. The wind had dropped completely. The valley was absolutely silent. "It crossed," she said quietly. "This was a crossing event." "A crossing from where to where?" I asked. She pointed west, back uphill, toward the starting zone, where the avalanche had initiated. Then she pointed east, downhill, down the valley, toward the river drainage and the lowlands beyond. "It was in the slope," she said. "In the snowpack, moving through it the way—" She paused, choosing her words. "The way we would move through air. The snow was its medium, and it left. The avalanche wasn't an accident. It was the displacement. The snow had to go somewhere when it moved through." I thought about the tracks I'd been finding all winter, the hundreds of prints on March 22nd, the sound in the concrete, the marks in the gallery wall, the 60-year-old construction reports. "It was here the whole time," I said, "since before the gallery, since before the highway." "Longer than that," Lena said. "These paths have been running for 10,000 years. We thought it was gravity and snowpack and slope angle. We thought we understood the mechanics." She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as exhausted honesty. "Some avalanches are avalanches," she said, "and some avalanches are footsteps." I resigned from the Mountain Corridor Safety Division on April 4th, not because I was told to, not because anyone forced me out. I resigned because I could not do the work anymore, not the physical work, which I'm still capable of, but the conceptual work. The fundamental assumption of my profession is that avalanches are natural phenomena governed by physics. Gravity acts on snow. Weak layers fail under load. Slabs release when the stress exceeds the strength. I was trained to measure those variables, forecast those failures, mitigate those hazards. My entire professional identity is built on the premise that the mountain is a system I can understand. I no longer believe that. Not for all mountains. Not for all paths. I still live in the same town. I still see the pass from my window on clear days. The highway opened again on April 15th after the spring melt stabilized. Traffic flows through the gallery every day. The concrete holds. The sensors Lena installed are still active. I can see the satellite uplink antenna from the pullout if I drive out there, which I do sometimes without meaning to. I check the avalanche reports every morning. Our team Dara still runs it. Marcus is still the senior field tech, issued their standard forecasts all spring. Moderate, considerable, low. The language of calibrated risk, the language I used to speak fluently. Last week, there was an unusual event, a size 2 slide on a path east of the gallery, a path that runs down into the river valley rather than toward the highway. Unusual because it released at night with no obvious trigger on a slope that had been rated as low hazard. The debris field was small. Nobody was hurt. The report described it as an isolated, natural release, probably caused by a temperature-induced weak layer failure. I drove out and looked at the debris through binoculars from the highway shoulder. The blocks were arranged in a line, heading east, evenly spaced. I went home. I didn't call anyone. There is no one to call who would change what is happening. There are only people who document it, and I'm not one of them anymore. But I want to say this clearly. Whatever is in those mountains, whatever has been there for longer than we've had roads or galleries or highways, it is moving. The tracks I found all winter were not something arriving. They were something pacing, preparing, building toward a crossing event that, when it came, shook 400 meters of reinforced concrete to its foundation and rearranged a debris field into the signature of its passage. It crossed east, into the valleys, into the watershed. And the tracks I find now, when I go hiking in the lower hills east of town, in the spring mud, in the soft ground along the river trail where nobody else walks early enough in the morning to see them before the sun dries the mud. Those tracks are not boot prints anymore. They are larger. They are spaced farther apart, and they do not end. They continue east, past the edge of what I can follow, beyond the tree line, and down the drainage toward wherever the river goes. They don't stop anymore. I think that's worse. I keep telling myself that the stopping was the thing that frightened me, that the abrupt termination, the boot print hanging in space with nothing after it, was the horror. And for months it was. The absence was the threat. The question mark at the end of every line of tracks was what kept me awake, what made me check and recheck the slopes with my binoculars every morning before dawn. But the continuation is worse. I understand that now. The stopping meant it was contained, bounded. Whatever it was, it existed within a defined territory, the starting zones, the upper paths, the snowpack above 9,000 feet. It paced, it circled, it pressed against limits I couldn't see, but it stayed. Now it doesn't stay. 3 weeks after my resignation, in late April, I was walking the river trail east of town at 6 in the morning. The trail follows the north bank of the drainage, a wide, silty channel that carries snowmelt from the pass down through the valley and eventually into the reservoir system 60 miles downstream. The ground was soft. Frost had lifted the soil overnight, and the morning sun hadn't yet baked it firm. Perfect tracking conditions. Anyone who's done field work in shoulder seasons knows that the hour between frost thaw and sun dry is when the ground holds every impression, like a photograph. The prints were in the mud along the bank, set back about 2 meters from the waterline. They weren't boot prints. The shape was still vaguely chevron. The angular pattern was there, those repeating V-shapes, but the scale was wrong. Each impression was roughly 40 centimeters long and 20 wide, too large for any human foot, too symmetrical for any animal track I know. The depth was significant, 4 centimeters into firm alluvial soil, suggesting a weight I didn't want to calculate. The stride length was 130 centimeters, nearly double what I'd measured all winter, and they ran east along the river for as far as I could see before the trail curved away from the bank and into the tree line. I followed them for 2 kilometers that first morning. They maintained perfect consistency, same depth, same spacing, same orientation, never deviating from the riverbank, never approaching the water, never moving away from it, parallel, as if the river itself was a guide rail. At the 2 kilometer mark, I stopped because the trail diverged from the river and I would have had to push through dense willow scrub to continue along the bank. I stood there at the edge of the thicket and looked at the last visible print, clear, precise, deep in the mud, and at the unbroken wall of vegetation beyond. Then I heard the river, not the sound of a river. I know the sound of a river. I live next to this river. It has a specific voice, a mid-frequency rush, broken by the gurgle of submerged rocks, the occasional slap of current against a log jam. That morning it sounded different, lower. The rush was still there, but beneath it was a rhythmic component, a pulse, a beat, almost tidal in character, regular, slow, about once every 4 seconds, a heartbeat cadence. I backed away from the bank. I went home. I did not call anyone, but I went back the next morning, and the next. Every day for 2 weeks, I walked the river trail at dawn and checked for prints. They were there every single morning, same pattern, same direction. Sometimes the stride length had increased slightly, 135 centimeters, 140, as if whatever was making them was gradually lengthening its pace, moving faster, or growing. On the 11th day, I brought a tape measure and a notebook and documented everything the way I used to document tracks in the snow. Force of habit, professional compulsion. I couldn't help it. I made a table date, location, stride length, print depth, print dimensions, soil moisture percentage estimated by feel. I was building a data set again. I couldn't stop myself from trying to understand, even though understanding had brought me nothing but the knowledge that understanding wasn't possible. On the 14th day, I found the second set of tracks. These were different. Same chevron pattern, but smaller. Back to the original size I'd first documented in January. Human scale. Boot print proportions. 70 centimeter stride. And these were walking west, against the flow, toward the mountains. They crossed the larger tracks at a shallow angle, and at the intersection point, both sets showed something I had never observed before. The impressions were deeper, as if both entities, the large one heading east and the smaller one heading west, had paused at the crossing point, had stood. The weight distribution in both track sets at that junction was even, flat, identical to the terminal prints I'd found all winter, but neither set ended there. They continued the large tracks east, the small tracks west, both resuming their stride on the far side of the intersection. Whatever pause had occurred, it hadn't been permanent. I was crouched at that intersection, measuring the depth differential, when a voice behind me said my name. I turned. Marcus was standing on the trail, 10 meters away. He was in civilian clothes jeans, a fleece jacket, hiking boots. Not a work day. He had his hands in his pockets, and his expression was the one I'd come to associate with the track terminations. Confusion held carefully inside a frame of professional calm. "I've been looking for you," he said. "Dara said you'd probably be out here." She knows I come here. She knows everything, She's been checking the trail camera feeds from the wildlife corridor stations, the ones the fish and game department runs along the river. He came closer, looked down at the tracks. She's been seeing these on camera for a week. She didn't want to call you because I think she thought you'd had enough. I have had enough. Yeah. He crouched beside me, looked at the intersection. But you're still here. I can't not be. Marcus nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded printout. A grainy black and white image, clearly a frame capture from a trail camera. It showed the riverbank at night, infrared illumination painting everything in that flat, gray monochrome. The mud was visible. The tracks were visible, both sets, the large and the small. The timestamp in the corner read 0342. Nothing else was in the frame. No animal, no person, no shape, just empty riverbank and tracks that shouldn't exist without something to make them. Fish and Game can't explain it, Marcus said. They think the camera's malfunctioning. Motion activated, but triggering on nothing, except the timestamps correlate exactly with when new tracks appear in the morning. The camera fires. Nothing's there. But in the morning, fresh prints. Same as our trail camera on the slope. Exact same behavior. He folded the printout and put it away. Colton, Dara wants to talk to you, officially. She's been in contact with Lena's people. I don't know how to say this without it sounding insane. They've upgraded the classification on our site. Upgraded to what? I don't know. She won't tell me the details, but they've installed new sensors in the gallery, not just the passive ones, active ones, things that send pulses into the ground and listen to what comes back. Priya was here last week. She didn't stay long. She looked uncomfortable, more than before. I stood up. My knees ached from crouching. The morning sun was hitting the river now, and the mud was beginning to firm, the tracks slowly losing their definition as the moisture evaporated. In an hour, they'd be invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. I'll talk to Dara, I said. I went to the operations center that afternoon. It felt strange walking back into that building. The fluorescent lights, the map wall with the 43 path overlays pinned in their usual positions, the forecasting terminal humming its perpetual data refresh. The coffee maker that always smells slightly burnt. I'd spent 6 winters in that room, and I'd left it 5 weeks ago, and it felt like returning to a place from a different life. Dara was in her office. She'd lost weight. The stress showed in her face, tighter around the jaw, shadows under her eyes, deeper than I remembered. Close the door, she said. I did. Lena's unit sent me something last week, a document. It's classified not in the military sense, but in the sense that it's not part of any public record, and I signed something agreeing to that. But I'm going to tell you what's in it because you deserve to know, and because I think they expected me to tell you. She turned her monitor toward me. On the screen was a scanned document, typewritten, old, the page edges brown with age. A header read, Corridor Geological Anomaly, Program Internal Memorandum, Distribution Restricted. The date was February 1963. This is from 2 years after the gallery was built, Dara said. It's authored by someone named W. Prescott, who held a title that no longer exists in the Highway Authority, Geological Stability Liaison. The document describes what they found during a routine structural inspection of the gallery in its second winter of operation. She scrolled down. The text was dense, technical, but certain passages stood out. During inspection of the south wall interior at section markers 7 through 12, the inspection team documented a series of shallow depressions in the concrete surface, consistent with localized compressive loading. These depressions are oriented in a linear sequence and spaced at regular intervals. The pattern is consistent with the step impressions noted in the original construction foreman's log. Ref Engel H. Daily Report entries, October to December 1959. The depressions have increased in depth by approximately 0.3 millimeters since initial documentation in March 1962, suggesting ongoing active formation rather than a static defect from the curing process. Dara scrolled further. The inspection team additionally noted the presence of similar depressions on the roof interior, specifically on the underside of the gallery ceiling between structural ribs 9 and 14. These ceiling impressions are inverted relative to the wall impressions and oriented in the same directional sequence, east. The mechanical implication that compressive force is being applied to the ceiling from above, passing through the concrete and leaving surface evidence on the underside, is inconsistent with standard load models. The gallery roof is designed to deflect debris from above. The impressions on the ceiling underside suggest a point load application from within or through the concrete matrix itself. She let me read the paragraph 3 times. Then she scrolled to the final section of the memorandum. Recommendation: continue seasonal monitoring of impression development. Do not repair or resurface affected concrete sections. Resurfacing may disrupt the observable progression pattern and eliminate our only means of tracking velocity and direction. The phenomenon appears to be transiting the structure at approximately 0.7 meters per day in an eastward direction. At current rate, it will have traversed the full 400-meter length of the gallery within approximately 18 months. Dara turned the monitor back toward herself. That was 1963, she said. The gallery is 400 meters long. At 0.7 meters per day, it would have completed the transit in about 571 days, a year and a half. So by late 1964, and then what? What was on the east side of the gallery in 1964? I knew. The east portal opens onto a section of highway that descends through switchbacks into the river valley. The same river valley where I'd been tracking prints every morning for 2 weeks. It left the gallery 60 years ago, I said. That's what Lena's people believe. They think it transited the gallery, used it, essentially, as a bridge across the active slide paths, and exited into the lower terrain east of the pass sometime in mid-1964. They think it's been in the valley since then, moving slowly, following the drainage. Then what were the tracks on the slopes this winter, if it already left the mountain? Dara's expression tightened. Lena thinks it wasn't one. She thinks what transited in 1964 was one. What I documented this winter, what you documented. She thinks those were others, still in the snowpack, still pacing, still building toward their own crossing events. The room felt very quiet. I could hear the forecasting terminal's fan, the distant hum of the highway outside, the building settling in the afternoon heat. How many? She doesn't know. Nobody knows. But the sensor data from the new active arrays, the ones Priya installed last week that send pulses into the ground, they're returning signatures that suggest multiple point load sources within the substrate beneath the gallery. Not one, not two. She used the word field. A field of them, she said, all stationary, all oriented east, all waiting. Waiting for what? For the same conditions: heavy loading, high instability, a slope primed to fail. The avalanche is the mechanism, the release, the energy of the slide is what, and I'm quoting Lena here, provides the displacement force for transit. They can't move through stable snowpack. They can only move when the snow itself is moving. The avalanche is their locomotion. I sat with that for a long time. I thought about every control mission I'd ever run, every Gazex charge I'd detonated, every explosive round I'd helped deploy from a helicopter. We'd been triggering avalanches deliberately for decades, small ones, controlled ones, to prevent the big uncontrolled ones. Standard mitigation, textbook practice, universally applied at every avalanche-prone highway in the world. Are we moving them? I asked. Every time we run a control mission, every time we trigger a slide, are we giving them a ride down? Dara didn't answer immediately. She opened a desk drawer and pulled out another printout. This one more recent, computer-generated. It was a map. Our pass. The 43 paths overlaid in their standard red outlines. But overlaid on top of those were blue dots. Dozens of them clustered in the starting zones of the most frequently controlled paths. The paths where we deployed the most explosives. The paths where we triggered the most slides. Lena's team ran the sensor data against our control mission logs going back to 2014, Dara said. The blue dots are subsurface anomaly signatures, point load concentrations in the substrate beneath each starting zone. There's a statistical correlation between the number of control missions run on a given path and the number of signatures detected beneath it. A correlation isn't causation. No, but the paths we control most frequently have the highest density, and the paths we rarely control, the ones that are naturally stable or don't threaten the highway, have almost none. I looked at the map. The Fiddler's Path, my path, the one I'd inspected dozens of times every winter, the one where I'd found the most tracks, the one that had produced the March 22nd crossing event, had the highest density of blue dots on the entire map. 14 signatures clustered in the starting zone. 13 now, I realized. After the crossing event, one had left. We've been feeding them, I said. Every control mission, every triggered slide. We've been moving them down slope, one avalanche at a time. Decades of mitigation work. We thought we were making the highway safe. I couldn't finish. Dara finished for me. We were providing transportation. I left the operations center and drove to the river trail. It was late afternoon, the wrong time for tracking. The ground was dry and hard, but I walked it anyway. 3 kilometers east of town, past the willow thicket, past the point where I usually turned around. I pushed through brush and scrambled over river cobbles and followed the bank as the canyon narrowed and the water ran faster between polished granite walls. At the narrows, the point where the river compresses to maybe 8 meters wide and the current accelerates dramatically, I found something that stopped me. The granite walls of the canyon showed marks, not on the muddy bank, on the rock face itself, 3 meters above the waterline. in smooth granite that had been polished by 10,000 years of spring floods. There were impressions, chevron shapes, pressed into stone, progressing east along the canyon wall in an evenly spaced sequence, as if something had walked along the vertical rock face the way I would walk along a sidewalk. They were old, much older than anything I'd documented in snow or mud. The edges were rounded by water erosion. These had been here for years, decades, maybe longer. They predated me. They predated the highway. They predated the gallery. Whatever Lena said had transited the gallery in 1964. It had been down here in the canyon long before that, or something like it had. I put my hand on one of the impressions. The granite was cold, river cooled. My fingers fit inside the chevron grooves. The pattern was approximately the same scale as the large tracks I'd been finding in the mud, 40 centimeters, the intermediate size, not the massive debris field scale of the March 22nd crossing event, but larger than human. As I stood there with my hand on the stone, the river's sound changed again. That low pulse, that heartbeat cadence, 4 seconds between beats. I felt it in my palm through the granite, a vibration so subtle I might have imagined it, except I'd felt this exact thing before, on the slope, in the gallery, in my sternum at 2 a.m. on a wind-loaded face. I pulled my hand away and walked back to town. That was 3 weeks ago. I have not returned to the canyon narrows. I have not stopped walking the river trail in the mornings, but I turn around earlier now. I tell myself it's because the trail conditions deteriorate past the willow thicket. That's true. It's not the reason. The reason is that the tracks in the morning mud have been changing. The large set, the 40-centimeter prints heading east, those continue. Same as always. Same spacing, same depth, same relentless eastward progression. But the smaller set, the human scale prints heading west, those have been getting closer to town. When I first saw them, the westbound tracks started about 2 kilometers east of the trailhead, as if whatever was making them had turned around at that distance and headed back toward the mountains. Each morning, they started a little closer, 100 meters closer, 50 meters, the turnaround point migrating west. 4 days ago, the westbound tracks started at the trailhead itself. Yesterday morning, I found them in the parking area at the trail access point, still heading west, still the original chevron pattern, human scale, 70-centimeter stride, walking away from the river toward town. They crossed the parking area and continued along the gravel shoulder of the county road for approximately 60 meters before the surface became too hard asphalt to hold an impression. I lost them at the pavement edge. I stood there on the road shoulder in the early morning, looking west along the county road toward the cluster of buildings that constitutes our town center, the gas station, the hardware store, the small grocery, the post office, the school, and I tried to tell myself that asphalt doesn't take prints, that I couldn't track them further because the medium wouldn't allow it, that they might have stopped at the pavement edge, the way they used to stop mid-stride on the snow abruptly, completely, finally. But they don't stop anymore. I said that already. The tracks in the mud don't terminate. They continue until I lose them. And losing them is not the same as them ending. This morning, I woke at 5, same as always, made coffee, stood at my kitchen window while it brewed, looking east toward the mountains where the first light was just touching the high ridges. The pass was visible, a shallow V in the skyline, white with late season snow. The gallery, a gray line across the lower slopes. Then I looked down at the sidewalk outside my apartment building, at the concrete path that runs from the front door to the street. There were cracks in the concrete. There have always been cracks. It's an old building. The freeze-thaw cycles destroy surfaces here faster than anywhere I've lived. But these cracks were new. I hadn't seen them yesterday. They ran in a straight line along the walkway, spaced at even intervals, and their shape, the angular pattern, the converging V. I went outside in my socks. The concrete was cold. I crouched down and looked at the cracks the way I used to look at tracks in the snow, measuring with my eye, assessing pattern and spacing and depth. They weren't cracks. They were compressions, shallow, perhaps 1 millimeter deep, but patterned, chevron-shaped, spaced at 70 centimeters. They led from the street to my front door. I'm writing this because Lena's number goes to voicemail now, has for a week. Dara confirmed that the sensor uplinks at the gallery stopped transmitting data 3 days ago, not a malfunction, she said, but a deliberate shutdown signal sent from the receiving end. Whoever was watching the data decided to stop watching, or decided there was nothing left to watch for. Marcus found tracks in the stairwell of his apartment building 2 days ago, chevron impressions in the poured concrete steps. He photographed them and sent them to me without comment, just the images, no text. I don't know what this means in a final sense. I don't know what it wants, if it wants anything, if wanting is even a concept that applies. I know that it moves through matter the way we move through air. I know that snow is easy for it, and stone is harder, and concrete is somewhere between. I know that it's been in these mountains for longer than humans have had language to describe it. I know that our highways and our galleries and our control missions have, for 60 years, been interacting with it in ways we never understood, providing it passage, providing it direction, providing it the kinetic energy of 10,000 deliberate avalanches to carry it down from the heights and into the valleys where we live. And I know that it followed me home. The prints on my walkway face inward, toward my door. They do not continue past it. This morning was the first time I have seen tracks that terminate since March, that old familiar pattern of a stride arrested mid-step. It stopped at my threshold. I don't know if that's a boundary it can't cross. I don't know if it's choosing not to. I don't know if tomorrow morning I'll find the compressions inside my hallway progressing toward my bedroom door with that same 70-centimeter patience. I do know this. I spent 6 years walking in the dark on slopes that wanted to kill me, and I was never afraid because I understood the mechanism. Gravity, load, failure, release, physics I could measure and predict and mitigate. The mountain was knowable. What's outside my door right now is not knowable. It uses the same medium I stand on. It walks through the ground I live above, and it has been getting closer with the same steady, measured pace it has maintained since January, since 1964, since long before any of us built anything on these mountains. I have not opened my front door today. The coffee is cold. The light is full now, morning establishing itself completely. Outside the window, the sidewalk is bright in the sun. The chevron compressions are fading as the concrete warms and expands slightly thermal movement closing those hairline depressions, the way sun on mud erases tracks by noon. By afternoon, nobody walking past my building will see anything unusual. The surface will look normal, undisturbed, but I know they're there, beneath the threshold, beneath everything we've built on top of what was already walking.